The schoolteacher was too proud to beg, so she undid his belt and whispered, "Make me feel worthy." Clara had always been a woman of quiet strength. She walked into her classroom every morning with her head held high, her posture straight, and her voice calm but firm. Students respected her immediately, and parents trusted her without question. She had earned this respect over years of dedication, working late into the evenings, preparing lessons, and caring for children who sometimes felt invisible in their own homes. But behind that composed exterior, Clara carried a private world filled with small, hidden struggles. She had built walls around herself, brick by brick, carefully ensuring that no one could see the doubts that sometimes gnawed at her. She prided herself on being independent, and she believed that asking for help was a weakness she could not afford. Her apartment was small, neatly kept, and filled with books that told stories of people who had faced challenges and overcome them. Clara often found solace in these stories, as if living through their victories could strengthen her own courage. She kept a small journal on her nightstand, where she wrote not about the children she taught or the lessons she gave, but about the battles she faced quietly each day. The problem was, life did not always wait for one to be ready. Challenges came uninvited, sometimes overwhelming, and Clara had learned to face them alone. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when the first crack in Clara's carefully maintained life began to appear. She had been feeling unusually tired, dragging herself through the motions of her day. Her students, normally full of energy, noticed her weariness and whispered to each other, concerned. Clara smiled at them, masking her exhaustion, and told herself she could handle it. She always did. After class, she stayed behind to help a student struggling with a math problem. Her dedication was unwavering, yet each step she took that day felt heavier than the last. Her colleague, Daniel, noticed. He was a fellow teacher who had worked at the school for many years. Unlike Clara, Daniel was more open with his feelings, quick to offer a kind word or a helping hand. He had seen Clara's tireless efforts and her reluctance to accept support, and he admired her for it. But he also worried. There was a difference between pride and stubbornness, and Daniel feared that Clara's pride sometimes kept her from getting the help she truly needed. "Clara," he said gently as he passed her in the hallway, "you look exhausted. Are you sure you're okay?" Clara smiled, the kind of smile that reassured others but hid her inner turmoil. "I'm fine, Daniel. Just a long day, that's all." Daniel hesitated. He wanted to insist, but he knew Clara well enough to understand that pressing her would only make her pull back further. So he nodded, offering a supportive smile before continuing down the hall. Clara watched him go, feeling a small pang of guilt. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to admit that she was struggling, but the words caught in her throat. Asking for help had never been easy for her. That evening, Clara returned to her apartment, the rain still tapping softly against the window. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, staring at the droplets sliding down the glass. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. She missed the sound of laughter, of someone sharing her burdens, but she reminded herself that she was strong, capable, and independent. She didn't need anyone else to validate her worth. She had built a life on her own terms, and she intended to continue doing so. Still, the fatigue lingered. Clara knew that something had to change, even if she didn't yet know what. She spent the night reading, trying to lose herself in stories where characters faced challenges that seemed impossible, yet somehow found the strength to continue. There was comfort in the fact that others had struggled and survived. It gave her hope, even if just a little. Over the next few days, Clara's routine continued. She taught her classes, helped students, and maintained her impeccable professionalism. Yet, every evening, she felt the weight of her pride pressing down on her. She kept thinking about the small cracks that had started to form in her life, the moments when she wished someone would notice, when she longed for a hand to hold, a voice to reassure her that she was not alone. Daniel continued to watch her from a distance, offering small gestures of support, a cup of coffee left on her desk, a kind note tucked into her papers. But Clara still resisted. She wanted to believe she could manage everything herself. She told herself that pride was a shield, a way to maintain control over her life, but deep down she knew that the shield was also a prison, keeping her from experiencing the connection and support she secretly craved. One afternoon, as Clara was preparing for a parent-teacher meeting, she received a phone call that shook her world. It was from her sister, calling with news of a family crisis that required immediate attention. Clara's heart sank, and for the first time she felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. She knew she could not handle this alone. Her pride, which had always been her greatest strength, suddenly felt like a heavy burden. For hours, she sat at her desk, staring at the phone, trying to figure out what to do. The thought of reaching out for help made her stomach twist. She had always believed that she had to be strong, that admitting vulnerability was unacceptable. But the reality was undeniable. She needed someone, anyone, to lean on. That evening, Daniel stopped by the school to check on her. He found her sitting in the empty classroom, her head in her hands, looking smaller than he had ever seen her. "Clara," he said softly, approaching her. "You don't have to do this alone. Let me help." Clara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and longing. She wanted to say yes, to finally let someone in, but the words stuck in her throat. Pride was powerful, and she had lived her life believing it protected her. Yet now she realized that it was also keeping her trapped. For the first time, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She took a deep breath and whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know if I can do this." Daniel nodded, understanding that this was the opening she had been avoiding for so long. He didn't push, didn't judge. He simply sat beside her, offering silent support, letting her know that she was not alone. That night, Clara went home feeling both terrified and relieved. The realization that she might have to rely on someone else was daunting, yet it was also strangely comforting. She had spent so many years building walls around herself that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about her life, her pride, and the challenges she had faced. She realized that strength was not just about standing alone, but also about knowing when to ask for help. She understood that vulnerability did not make her weak, it made her human. The next morning, Clara returned to school with a new sense of determination. She still had work to do, challenges to face, and pride to manage, but she also had a glimmer of hope. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time she allowed herself to imagine a life where she did not have to bear every burden alone. Her students noticed a subtle change in her that day. Clara's smile seemed softer, more genuine. Her voice, while still calm and firm, carried a warmth that had been absent before. She was still the strong, independent teacher they admired, but now there was something more, something human and relatable, something that made them see not just their teacher, but the woman behind the lessons. Daniel, observing from across the hallway, felt a quiet relief. He knew the journey had only just begun, but he also knew that Clara had taken the first, most difficult step, acknowledging that she could not do everything alone. And though she would continue to struggle with her pride, Clara had opened the door to a possibility she had never allowed herself to consider before, that strength could exist alongside vulnerability, and that true worth was not measured by independence alone, but also by the courage to accept help when it was needed. The rain returned that evening, gentle and persistent, tapping against the window as Clara sat with her journal. She wrote not of lessons taught or students helped, but of the quiet revolution that had begun inside her, the realization that being human meant embracing both strength and fragility. It was a small victory, perhaps invisible to the world, but monumental in its significance. Clara's pride had not vanished, but it had softened, making space for trust, hope, and the possibility of connection. As she closed her journal and turned off the light, Clara allowed herself a moment of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and perhaps new struggles. But for tonight, she was content in the knowledge that she had faced her first, most personal battle, not with students, not with work, but with herself, and had emerged, if not fully victorious, then at least willing to try. Clara woke the next morning feeling a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. The previous day had been a quiet turning point, though she hadn't fully realized it yet. Her usual routine felt slightly different, as if a tiny crack in her protective shell had begun to widen, letting in a faint, almost fragile light of hope. She went about her morning tasks, preparing her lessons and organizing her classroom, but there was a subtle shift in the way she moved, the way she breathed. For the first time in years, she considered that maybe she didn't have to face everything alone. As the students arrived, Clara noticed the usual chatter, the familiar laughter, and the occasional mischief. Yet today, she found herself noticing something else, a warmth in their smiles, a willingness in their eyes to connect, to share, to be seen. Teaching had always been her passion, her purpose, but now it felt slightly different. It wasn't just about imparting knowledge. It was about connection, about allowing herself to be part of the lives of those she taught in a deeper, more genuine way. During lunch break, Daniel approached her again. He had always been observant, understanding that Clara's pride often masked deeper emotions. "Morning, Clara," he said softly, offering a small smile. "You seem different today." "Lighter, maybe?" Clara felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't sure if she wanted to admit it, but a part of her longed to let him in. "I guess I'm just thinking," she replied cautiously. Her pride whispered that she should remain guarded, yet another part of her, the part that had felt the weight of loneliness for so long, whispered back that it was okay to let someone see her struggle. Daniel nodded, sensing her hesitation. "Thinking is good. But remember, you don't have to carry everything alone. Even the strongest people need support sometimes." Clara looked at him, truly looked, and saw not judgment, but understanding. For years she had equated asking for help with weakness, but now she realized it was the opposite. Strength wasn't about facing life alone. It was about recognizing when to lean on someone else. The day continued, each lesson flowing smoothly, but Clara noticed small, meaningful interactions that made her heart feel lighter. A student who had always been shy raised her hand without hesitation. Another who struggled with reading approached her for guidance without fear. In these moments, Clara realized that vulnerability was not just her own. It was shared, and it could be met with kindness and patience. She felt a strange sense of liberation in witnessing it. After school, Clara remained behind to organize her classroom. The quiet was comforting, but her thoughts kept returning to her sister's situation and the unresolved stress it brought. She knew that facing it alone would be exhausting, and yet the fear of letting someone else in held her back. Pride was a strange, powerful thing. It had served her well for years, giving her control and respect, but it now felt like a barrier keeping her from finding relief. Daniel returned to check on her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on her desk and sat across from her, waiting patiently. Clara accepted the coffee with a small nod. grateful for his presence yet still wary of allowing herself to fully rely on him. "Clara," he said gently, "I know you're strong. I've seen you handle more than most people could. But even strong people need a hand sometimes. You don't have to fight every battle alone." Clara took a deep breath, trying to find the words to respond. She wanted to tell him everything, her fears, her pride, her doubts, but the words felt heavy on her tongue. She had spent so long managing her life independently that the thought of opening up was both terrifying and exhilarating. Finally, she whispered almost to herself, "I don't know if I can." Daniel leaned forward slightly, giving her the space to continue. "You can," he said softly. "And if you want, I can help you. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. And humans weren't meant to carry everything alone." The offer was simple, yet it carried the weight of understanding, acceptance, and trust. She wanted to accept it, to finally let go of the burden she had carried for so long. But pride still whispered in her ear, warning her to remain guarded, to maintain control, to protect herself. She spent the evening reflecting on the day. She thought about her students, her sister, and Daniel. She thought about all the time she had tried to manage everything alone and how exhausting it had been. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could share her burdens, where she could trust someone else to be there without fearing judgment or loss of respect. The next few days were a delicate balance. Clara continued her routines, teaching, grading, and guiding her students. But in the quiet moments, when she walked through empty hallways, when she prepared lessons late at night, when she stared out the window at the fading light, she allowed herself to feel, to think, and to consider the possibility of help. Each day she noticed small changes within herself, a willingness to pause, a growing comfort in acknowledging her limits, a subtle openness to trust. One afternoon, she faced another test of her pride. A student, unusually distraught, approached her with a problem he couldn't solve. Normally, Clara would have found a way to manage it alone, guiding him step by step. But this time, she hesitated, unsure of how to help without feeling overwhelmed. Daniel, noticing from across the room, stepped forward and offered quiet support, guiding the student alongside Clara without taking over. Clara felt a surge of relief and gratitude. She realized that accepting help did not diminish her role or her strength. It amplified it. Together they could achieve more, support more, and handle challenges with greater ease. The lesson extended beyond academics. It was a lesson in life, in connection, in trust. That evening, Clara sat with her journal again. She wrote about the subtle victories, the quiet shifts in her heart, and the slow opening of her walls. She described the small moments where she had allowed herself to feel vulnerable, and the profound impact it had on her spirit. For the first time, she acknowledged that strength and vulnerability were not opposites. They were partners, complementing each other in ways she had never fully understood. As the week progressed, Clara's interactions with Daniel grew more natural and supportive. He never forced her to share more than she was ready to, never pushed her beyond her comfort. Instead, he offered presence, empathy, and quiet guidance. Clara began to see that trust could be built gradually, and that asking for help was not a single moment of surrender, but a series of small steps. At school, her students began to notice a subtle change in her demeanor. Clara was still the firm, respected teacher they had always admired, but now there was a warmth to her presence, a sense of accessibility. She smiled more freely, listened more patiently, and allowed herself to connect in ways she had never permitted before. The classroom became not just a place of learning, but a space where mutual respect and understanding flourished. One evening, as she prepared to leave school, Daniel caught up with her in the hallway. "You're doing well, Clara," he said gently. I can see the difference. It's not about losing pride. It's about gaining balance." Clara smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. "Balance. I think I'm starting to understand what that means," she replied. Her voice carried a mix of relief and quiet determination. She knew she had a long way to go, but the first steps had been taken. Returning to her apartment that night, Clara reflected on the changes within herself. She thought about her pride, her fears, and the small, courageous choices she had made over the past week. She realized that life was not about perfection or independence. It was about connection, trust, and the willingness to embrace both strength and vulnerability. Sitting by the window, she watched the city lights flicker in the distance. The world outside seemed both vast and intimate, a reflection of the balance she was beginning to discover within herself. She felt a quiet sense of hope, a gentle anticipation for the days ahead. She knew there would be challenges, moments of doubt, and tests of her pride, but she also knew that she was no longer alone. In that quiet moment, Clara made a promise to herself to continue taking small steps toward openness, to allow herself to be supported, and to recognize that her worth was not measured solely by her independence. She understood now that asking for help did not make her weak. It made her human, and in humanity there was profound strength. For the first time in years, Clara felt a sense of freedom. She had begun to untangle the threads of her pride, to loosen the grip of self-reliance that had once defined her. And as she closed her journal and turned off the light, she allowed herself to rest, knowing that the journey toward trust, connection, and emotional balance had begun, and that she was ready to walk it, one careful step at a time. Clara woke that morning with a quiet determination she had never felt before. The small victories of the past week had given her courage, but she knew the real challenge was still ahead. Life was unpredictable, and her sister's ongoing struggles still weighed heavily on her mind. She realized that until she confronted her own fears, her pride, and her resistance to leaning on others, she would continue to feel trapped by her own expectations. At school, Clara moved through her lessons with renewed energy, but also a newfound awareness. She noticed not just her students' academic struggles, but their emotional ones too. A shy girl, hesitant to speak up, looked at Clara with a mix of hope and fear. A boy who often acted out was unusually quiet, fidgeting with a pencil, unsure how to express what he felt. Clara understood, more deeply than ever, that strength wasn't about control. It was about connection, and sometimes connection required vulnerability. During lunch, Daniel approached her once more. "Clara," he said softly, "I've noticed the change in you. You're still strong, but there's something else now, something honest, something real." Clara felt a lump in her throat. She had wanted to be seen for so long, yet being truly seen terrified her. Pride whispered to her, "Don't let yourself be weak. Don't let anyone know how much you struggle." But another voice, quieter yet stronger, urged her to take the next step, to truly open up. I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't push. He simply nodded, giving her the space to continue at her own pace. "You don't have to be ready all at once. Just start where you are." The words struck her deeply. Enough. For years, Clara had felt that her strength had to be absolute, that any hesitation or need for help was a failure. But Daniel's calm, steady presence reminded her that human worth was not measured by perfection, but by courage, even in small steps. That evening, after the students had left and the school halls were empty, Clara found herself alone in her classroom. She stared at the papers on her desk, the lesson plans she had prepared, and the quiet emptiness of the room. For a long time she had clung to order and control, believing that they would protect her from disappointment and failure. But now she realized that control had kept her isolated, that her walls had prevented her from truly experiencing life, from allowing herself to be supported and valued. She took a deep breath and picked up her journal. Writing had always been a way for her to process her thoughts, but now it served another purpose: to explore the deep, complex emotions she had been hiding from everyone, including herself. She wrote about her fears, her pride, her desire to be seen, and the hope that someone could understand her without judgment. As she wrote, her thoughts kept returning to Daniel. He had been a constant presence, patient, understanding, and without expectation. He had offered help without demanding gratitude or recognition, had given her space without pushing, and had allowed her to feel safe in her vulnerability. Clara realized that trust was not built in grand gestures, but in quiet, consistent acts of understanding and care. Later that night, Clara sat by her window, looking out at the city lights. The world outside seemed alive, full of possibilities she had long denied herself. She thought about her sister, her students, and Daniel, and she understood that asking for help was not a single act, but a process, a series of moments in which she could allow herself to be human, to share her burdens, and to accept support without fear of losing dignity. The turning point came unexpectedly. Her sister called again, and this time the problem was urgent. Clara felt the familiar tightness of panic rise in her chest. She had managed crises before, but the combination of her exhaustion, fear, and pride made this moment different. For the first time, she felt truly powerless. She sat down heavily in her chair, unsure how to proceed. Pride screamed at her to handle it alone, to prove that she was capable. But the exhaustion and the weight of responsibility were too much. She realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that she could not do this alone. At that moment, Daniel appeared in her classroom carrying a quiet calm with him. "Clara," he said gently, "whatever this is, you don't have to face it alone. I'm here." Clara's heart raced. She wanted to say yes, to finally let someone in, to admit that she needed help, but the words felt trapped in her throat. Pride still urged her to resist, to maintain control, to protect herself from perceived weakness. But the desire to feel supported, to feel worthy of care and understanding, was stronger. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear, longing, and vulnerability. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, yet somehow comforting, a space where trust could begin to take root. Finally, Clara took a deep breath and made a choice. She allowed herself to let go, even if only slightly. She opened the belt of control she had clung to so tightly, the symbolic barrier of her pride, and whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough. Make me feel worthy." Daniel's expression softened. He didn't scold, judge, or pity her. Instead, he simply nodded, acknowledging the courage it had taken for her to speak these words. "You are worthy," he said quietly, "not because of what you do, but because of who you are, and I'll be here with you every step of the way." The words were like a balm to Clara's heart. She felt the tension she hadn't even realized she carried begin to release. Her pride, which had always felt like armor, had been a heavy weight, keeping her isolated. Now, in this moment, she understood that true strength included the willingness to be vulnerable, to allow another person to see her struggles, and to accept support without shame. Over the next few hours, they worked together to find solutions for her sister's problem. Daniel's calm guidance, practical help, and unwavering presence made the task feel less overwhelming. Clara realized that accepting help did not diminish her abilities or her independence. It enhanced them. Together they could face challenges more effectively, and the sense of partnership created a profound relief she had never experienced before. As the evening progressed, Clara felt a transformation within herself. The walls she had built around her heart were not gone, but they had softened, allowing light and connection to enter. She realized that the journey toward trust and openness was ongoing, but this first step, this act of surrender, was monumental. It had taken courage, humility, and self-awareness, and she felt proud not despite her vulnerability, but because of it. That night, Clara returned home, exhausted but at peace. She sat by the window, journal in hand, reflecting on the events of the day. She wrote about the moments of fear, the struggle with pride, and the relief of finally allowing herself to be supported. She acknowledged the small victories, the recognition of her own limits, the courage to ask for help, and the understanding that worthiness was not tied to independence alone. As she closed her journal and prepared for bed, Clara felt a profound sense of hope. The journey was far from over, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time, she understood that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that asking for help was not a sign of weakness, and that being truly human meant allowing oneself to be seen, understood, and valued. The next morning, Clara woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She carried herself with the same quiet strength she had always shown, but now there was an added softness, an openness that allowed her to connect more deeply with others. Her students noticed the change, feeling a warmth and approachability in her presence that had been absent before. She smiled more freely, listened more patiently, and allowed herself to be truly present with those around her. Daniel continued to support her, never pushing, never judging, always patient. Their partnership, built on trust and mutual respect, grew stronger with each passing day. Clara realized that relationships, like strength, required care, effort, and openness. She had spent so long believing that she had to handle everything alone, and now she understood that sharing burdens and accepting help was a profound act of courage and self-respect. By the end of the week, Clara felt a sense of balance she had never experienced. She still faced challenges, responsibilities, and moments of doubt, but she no longer felt trapped by her own pride. She had learned that vulnerability was not a weakness, that asking for help was not a failure, and that true strength came from embracing both independence and connection. Sitting by her window that night, Clara reflected on the journey she had begun. She thought about her sister, her students, Daniel, and the small steps that had led her to this point. She understood that life was not about perfection or total control. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to let oneself be human. For the first time in years, Clara felt a sense of freedom, a quiet peace that came from acknowledging her own needs and allowing herself to be supported. The path ahead would still have obstacles, but she was ready to face them with the knowledge that she did not have to do it alone. She had taken the first, most difficult step, and that was enough for now. Clara woke early the next morning, the sunlight spilling gently through her window. She felt different, lighter somehow, yet grounded in a way she hadn't been before. The past weeks had been a journey of self-discovery, courage, and gradual surrender, and now she could feel the small but profound shift within herself. For the first time in years, she no longer felt the constant weight of her pride pressing her down. She understood that strength and vulnerability could coexist, and that asking for help was not a failure, but a step toward real resilience. At school, Clara greeted her students with a warmth that surprised even her. The shyest children approached her without hesitation, seeking guidance, sharing stories, and laughing freely in a way that warmed her heart. She had always been respected, but now she felt truly connected, as though the walls she had built around herself had softened just enough for trust and care to flow through. Every interaction carried a subtle joy, a mutual understanding that extended beyond lessons and grades. Daniel noticed the change immediately. He had been patient throughout Clara's journey, never rushing her, never judging her hesitation or fear. But today he saw something different, an ease in her posture, a confidence in her voice, and a brightness in her eyes that reflected a deeper self-assurance. "You're doing really well, Clara," he said quietly, approaching her during lunch break. Clara smiled, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "I feel freer," she admitted. "It's strange, but I feel like I can handle things differently now. I don't feel trapped by my own pride anymore." Daniel nodded, understanding completely. "That's exactly it. You haven't lost your strength. You've gained balance. You've learned that being human isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to let someone walk with you." The words resonated deeply with Clara. She thought about the time she had carried burdens alone, about the exhaustion that had crept into her life without her noticing. She realized now that independence had value, but connection had power. Trusting someone, letting someone in, did not diminish her worth. It enhanced it. After school, Clara returned home, her apartment feeling brighter and more welcoming than ever. She sat by the window with her journal, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past weeks. She wrote about the small victories, the moments when she had allowed herself to be vulnerable, the times she had accepted help, and the growing understanding that asking for support was an act of courage, not weakness. Her thoughts drifted to her sister, whose struggles had initially sparked Clara's journey. Clara had worked with Daniel to support her, providing practical help and emotional comfort. The experience had taught her the power of collaboration and mutual care. She understood now that she didn't have to bear the weight of the world on her own. Sharing the load allowed her to be more effective, more present, and more compassionate. The following days continued with a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. Clara moved through her lessons with confidence, engaging her students not just as learners, but as individuals with unique stories, emotions, and challenges. She listened more attentively, smiled more openly, and offered guidance that extended beyond academics. Her classroom became a place of warmth and trust, where children felt valued and understood. Daniel remained a steady presence in her life, providing support without expectation. He shared small moments of encouragement, practical advice, and quiet companionship, allowing Clara to grow at her own pace. Their partnership, built on trust and mutual respect, had become a cornerstone of her emotional balance. Clara realized that relationships, like strength, required patience, care, and openness. She had spent so long believing that she had to handle everything alone, and now she understood that shared support was a sign of true resilience. One afternoon, as she was grading papers, Clara received a call from her sister. The crisis that had once seemed overwhelming had been resolved, thanks in part to the support Clara had allowed herself to accept. Her sister's voice was filled with gratitude, relief, and warmth. "Thank you for being there," she said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Clara felt a wave of pride and tenderness. She realized that helping others was not about shouldering burdens alone, but about creating a network of care, empathy, and understanding. By allowing herself to receive support, she had been able to give more fully, more effectively, and with a deeper sense of presence. She responded with a smile in her voice. "We faced it together. That's what matters." That evening, Clara reflected on her journey in her journal. She wrote about the lessons she had learned, that strength and vulnerability are partners, that pride is valuable only when balanced with openness, and that human worth is measured not by independence alone, but by the courage to connect, trust, and embrace support. She realized that these lessons extended beyond her personal life. They influenced the way she taught, the way she cared for others, and the way she approached every challenge. Over the next few weeks, Clara noticed continued growth, both in herself and in those around her. Her students responded to her authenticity and warmth, demonstrating more confidence and empathy in their interactions. Colleagues admired the subtle shift in her demeanor, noting how she managed challenges with poise and openness and fire. Clara herself felt more resilient, not because she had conquered every obstacle alone, but because she had learned the profound power of shared strength and trust. Daniel, as always, remained a steady presence. Their friendship deepened, marked by understanding, mutual respect, and quiet companionship. Clara learned that true support does not demand perfection, judgment, or immediate resolution. It simply exists, consistent, reliable, and patient, allowing those who accept it to grow, heal, and flourish. One afternoon, Clara found herself sitting in her classroom after school, the quiet enveloping her in a peaceful embrace. She looked around at the room she had shaped over the years, at the walls decorated with students' work, and at the small objects she had placed to create comfort and inspiration. She realized that this space, much like her own heart, had transformed. Where there had once been rigidity and control, there was now openness and warmth. Where there had been isolation, there was now connection and trust. She thought about her pride, the pride that had once been her shield, her constant companion. She understood now that pride was not inherently wrong, but it required balance. Unchecked, it could isolate and burden, but tempered with humility, it could coexist with empathy, openness, and compassion. Clara felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons she had learned, for the courage she had found, and for the support she had allowed herself to receive. As evening approached, Daniel stopped by the school to walk her home. The streets were quiet, the sky painted with the soft hues of sunset. They walked side by side, comfortable in silence, each step carrying the unspoken understanding of shared journeys, mutual respect, and trust. "Clara," Daniel said gently, breaking the silence, "you've come a long way. I can see it in everything you do. Your strength, your openness, it's inspiring." Clara looked at him, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with pride or achievement. "I feel stronger, in a different way," she admitted. "Not because I'm handling everything alone, but because I'm allowing myself to be part of something bigger, part of a network of trust, care, and support." Daniel smiled, and Clara realized that this was the true reward, not recognition, not control, but the deep satisfaction of balance, connection, and the courage to embrace her own humanity. When she returned home that night, Clara sat by her window one last time before bed. The city lights flickered like tiny stars, each one a reminder of the vastness of the world and the countless connections that made life meaningful. She thought about her students, her sister, Daniel, and the journey she had undertaken. She understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but she now faced them with a new perspective, one grounded in trust, humility, and courage. Her journal lay open before her. She wrote one final entry for the journey she had begun, about pride, strength, vulnerability, and the lessons she had learned. She reflected on the importance of accepting help, embracing connection, and allowing herself to be truly seen. She acknowledged the fears she had overcome, the growth she had achieved, and the peace she had found in balancing independence with openness. As she closed her journal, Clara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had reclaimed her sense of worth, not by proving her strength to the world, but by understanding her humanity and embracing the courage to let others walk beside her. She had learned that true strength was not solitary. It was shared, nurtured, and strengthened by trust, empathy, and connection. For the first time in her adult life, Clara felt fully at peace. Pride no longer weighed her down. Fear no longer held her back. She had discovered that worthiness was not a prize to earn alone, but a gift to recognize in oneself and others. And in that recognition, she found freedom, joy, and the quiet confidence that whatever challenges life might bring, she would face them with courage, balance, and the knowledge that she was never truly alone.